Hogsmeade should have been a picture book village, the kind that lived in memory the way sugar lived on the tongue long after the sweet was gone. Tonight it was a throat full of smoke. The wind came sharp off the hills and brought the smell of burning pine, of something older than pine. Stone heated too hard, magic scalding the air. Harry kept his head down as if the night itself might recognize him. His scar prickled in brief, bright stabs. Not pain exactly, more like a warning light behind bone. Hermione walked close enough that her shoulder brushed his sleeve whenever the path narrowed. Ron lagged half a step behind, scanning windows, doorways, the pale stretch of road where a patrol might appear. Each of them had the careful stillness of someone crossing a frozen lake, listening for the first treacherous crack. Up ahead, the Hogs had hunched against the gale like a man bracing for a blow. The sign swung, squealing on its hook. Someone had boarded the windows from the inside, the rough planks nailed crookedly, the gaps stuffed with rags. A tavern that had always looked like it would bite now looked like it had been bitten. Ron's hand tightened around his wand. "This is mad," he muttered, but there was no heat in it, only the numbness of a truth too big to swallow. "It's the only way," Hermione said, and her voice had that thin steadiness she wore when she was holding herself together by force. Harry pushed the door. It resisted, then yielded with a grudging scrape. Warmth rolled out in a wave that smelled of stale ale, unwashed wool, and goats. The fire was low in the hearth. The light was mean and reddish, throwing shadows like claw marks across the floor. Eyes glinted from the back of the room. A tall, gaunt man sat as if he'd grown out of the chair, his beard like a nest of gray wire. A goat stared balefully at them from beside his boots. Aberforth Dumbledore didn't rise. He didn't need to. The force of him was in the way the room seemed to shrink, making their presence feel loud. "You," he said at last, and the word was a stone dropped into still water. His gaze pinned Harry, hard and assessing, as if trying to decide whether the boy was worth the trouble his name attracted. Harry stepped forward anyway. "We need to get into Hogwarts." At that, something like dark amusement flickered. "A lot of people need a lot of things tonight." Aberforth took a sip from his glass, never looking away. "And yet the world keeps on refusing them." Hermione's fingers were white around her wand. "It's already started," she said, and though she kept her voice low, it trembled at the edges. "They're coming. They've been coming for months." Aberforth leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You think you're the first lot to blunder in here with hero in your eyes? I've seen aurors with their medals still shiny. I've seen boys who couldn't grow a beard and called it courage. I've seen—" Harry felt something in him go cold and sharp. "Then you've seen why we have to go." For a long moment Aberforth stared, as if weighing Harry's face against memories that had festered into grudges. Then his gaze slid to Hermione and Ron, and something softened. Not kindness exactly, but the tired recognition of young people already too old. "There's a passage," he said, "if it still holds." Ron's breath left him in a shaky exhale. "It holds." Aberforth's mouth twisted. "You sound sure for someone who's never had a mountain fall on his head." "Not a mountain," Harry said, because the word that haunted him was a castle. Aberforth rose at last, slow with the stiffness of age and grief. He moved to the back wall, to a framed portrait so dusty it looked blind. The portrait's eyes snapped open as if it had been sleeping lightly. "Ariana," Aberforth said, and there was iron in the name. The girl in the frame looked out with a strange stillness, hair falling across a pale cheek. She didn't smile. She simply turned, and the canvas became something else. An opening, darkness behind it, a breath of cold air like the inside of the earth. Hermione swallowed. "The room of requirement, or what's left of it," Aberforth said, and the words landed with a weight none of them could place yet. Harry stepped toward the gap. The wind outside howled, but from the tunnel came a deeper sound, distant and dull. Like thunder, like stone breaking its own bones. The passage was older than comfort. It pressed in on them, Close stone, wet stone. Stone that had held secrets long before any of them were born. Harry's footsteps sounded too loud. Somewhere far above, the world was doing something violent. Now and then the tunnel trembled, a faint vibration through the soles of his shoes, and each time Hermione's free hand shot out as if she could steady the air. They moved single file, wands out, light trembling at the end of their spells. The tunnel stank of damp and something metallic, like blood diluted in water. Harry tried not to think of all the times he'd run through Hogwarts corridors with laughter in his chest, late for a lesson, chased by Filch, hunted by a problem that still allowed room for homework. The trembling underfoot felt like the castle warning him, those days are over. A shadow flitted ahead, quick as a startled bat. Ron jerked his wand up. "It's me," a voice hissed, and then a face appeared in the wand light. Freckled, sharp-eyed, hair matted with sweat. "Don't hex me, you great plank." "Neville?" Hermione breathed, and it came out like a prayer answered. Neville Longbottom looked like someone had tried to break him and failed. There were bruises along his jaw, and a cut on his forehead that hadn't been properly healed. His clothes hung in rags, and around his neck something glinted, silver, small, stubbornly bright. The sword hilt of Gryffindor's crest on a chain, like a promise worn close to the heart. "About time," Neville said, but his grin wobbled. "We've been waiting." Harry's chest tightened. "Where?" "Come on," Neville interrupted, already backing away, beckoning forward. "We can't stand here." The passage. Sometimes it shifts. Like the castle's trying to decide whether it wants to keep the door open. "None." They followed him, the tunnel bending, climbing. As they walked, Neville spoke in quick bursts, as if words were another kind of spell he had to cast fast before fear could interrupt. "They've got Death Eaters in Hogsmeade," he said. "And Dementors, too. Not inside. Yet. Professors have been keeping them out with patronesses. But the wards, they're not right." Hermione's brows drew together. "Not right how?" Neville's eyes flicked up as if he could see through stone to the sky above. Like something's chewing them. A tremor went through the tunnel, stronger this time. Dust sifted down. Hermione coughed, and Ron swore under his breath. Neville didn't slow. "We've been using the room to hide people," he said. "Kids who didn't want to go along with the Caros. And now, well, now it's something else. It's not just hiding." They reached a section where the ceiling dipped and the air turned warmer, thick with the smell of sweat and bodies. Voices came faintly through the stone, a murmur like a hive. Harry's heartbeat kicked hard. "Is everyone?" "Not everyone," Neville said. "Enough." He pushed his hand against the rock wall. For a second, nothing happened. Then the stone rippled, like water remembering it wasn't meant to be stone. An opening unfolded, edges smooth, and warm light spilled out. Harry stepped through and felt the world change. The room of requirement was crowded, but not chaotic. It had shaped itself into a vast chamber with hammocks strung between pillars, blankets piled in corners, a table where someone had set out crusts of bread, and a teapot that was steaming bravely. Faces turned toward them, some sharp with suspicion, some widening with hope, some simply exhausted. Ginny Weasley pushed her way through the crowd. Hair wild, eyes bright. Luna Lovegood followed, serene as moonlight. Dean Thomas, Seamus Finnegan, a knot of others. Students who had become fighters because there was nothing else left to become. Ginny reached Harry first and threw her arms around him with fierce, reckless relief. For a heartbeat, Harry let himself hold on, as if he could anchor himself to something real. Her hair smelled of smoke and soap and the faintest trace of something summer-like that didn't belong in war. "You came," she said into his shoulder. "Yeah," Harry managed. His throat felt thick. "Yeah." Somewhere above them, the castle groaned. A long, low sound, like a ship's hull twisting in a storm. Luna tilted her head. "It's frightened," she said softly. Ron stared at her. "The castle?" Luna blinked as if the answer was obvious. Of course. Neville's grin was gone. They've started moving, he said. Professor McGonagall's called everyone who can fight to the Great Hall. Harry felt the pull of it, like gravity. The moment had come, and it didn't care whether he was ready. Passage out of the room was a throat into the castle's body, and Hogwarts felt feverish. The familiar corridors had a different scent now. Hot stone, sweat, smoke, and the sharp tang of spells cast too close to flesh. Portraits whispered frantically as they passed. Some were empty, their subjects gone to carry messages. Others clutched at their frames like people clinging to lifeboats. They climbed, cutting through stairwells Harry had walked 100 times. But the stairs didn't shift playfully now. They shuddered and jolted like frightened animals. Somewhere, glass shattered. A distant scream rose and was swallowed by the roar of something massive outside. Giants, Neville said, reading their faces. At least two. Hagrid and Madame Maxime are trying to hold them at the edge. Hermione's face went tight. The wards! Professor Flitwick said they're fraying. Neville replied. And when Flitwick says a ward is fraying, you listen. They reached a landing where the air was colder, drafts whistling through new cracks in the stone. A suit of armor stood lopsided, helmet dented, as if it had taken a blow meant for a man. Ron brushed past it and it clattered, startling them all. Ginny shot Ron a look that was half scorn, half plea. Keep it together. I am, Ron snapped, then immediately softened. Sorry, another tremor. Stronger? The wall to their left shed a cascade of grit. Hermione's light flickered. Harry closed his eyes for a fraction of a second and saw, unbidden, the memory of Voldemort's face in his mind. Cold delight. That sense of a hand turning a knob somewhere deep in the world. They spilled into a broader corridor, and there, as if the castle had been holding its breath, the sound of 1,000 people hit Harry all at once. Shouts echoed. Feet pounded. The air tasted like panic and iron. At the far end, the doors of the Great Hall stood open, light pouring out. The ceiling inside was enchanted to show the sky, and tonight it showed a bruise of black clouds, lit from below by distant fire. Torches blazed along the walls, their flames bending in unnatural wind, as if even inside Hogwarts the storm was trying to force its way in. Minerva McGonagall stood at the center of the hall, a small figure with a spine like a sword. Her tartan robes were torn at the hem. A streak of soot ran along her cheekbone. Around her clustered teachers and older students, the Order, parents who had come with desperate love in their hands. Harry saw Kingsley Shacklebolt's broad shoulders, the grim set of his mouth. He saw Remus Lupin, pale and sharp-eyed, and beside him Nymphadora Tonks, her hair a dull brown, face taut with worry and stubborn courage. He saw Molly Weasley gripping a wand like it was a kitchen knife, Arthur beside her, and Percy's face white with regret and resolve. McGonagall's gaze snapped to Harry like a hook. Potter, she said, and the word was not accusation, not reverence, simply recognition of a piece finally returning to a board already on fire. Harry stepped forward. The hall's murmur surged, then stilled, as if everyone had been waiting for him to arrive so they could decide what to feel. He hated it, that weight of expectation, and yet he understood it. In war, people needed symbols the way drowning people needed wood. We're evacuating the younger students, McGonagall said briskly, because if she allowed herself softness, she might shatter. Through Aberforth's passage, anyone who wishes to fight may remain. Anyone who wishes to leave now. A hush. Then movement, immediate and messy. Younger students began to spill toward the doors in clumps, crying, clinging. Some older ones stayed, jaws set, eyes bright with terror and pride. Hermione's hand found Harry's sleeve, a silent question. Harry had no answer to give. His mission sat in his chest like a second heart. Horcruxes. Find. Destroy. End him. Somehow. While everything else burned. The hall shook violently. This time it wasn't a tremor. It was a punch. Plates leapt on tables. Dust rained from the rafters. A crack split the stone somewhere overhead with a sound like lightning hitting earth. McGonagall's chin lifted. "Positions," she snapped. Outside, the first scream of the castle began. They moved like people who had practiced this in nightmares. Tables were shoved aside, benches overturned into barricades. Spells stitched the air. Protego, repello, charms to strengthen stone, to harden wood, to bind broken things together. The teachers worked with the swift economy of experience. Flitwick's wand traced quick, precise arcs, the air shimmering as if the space itself had gained skin. Sprout murmured to the vines coiled in pots and baskets, and the vines responded, unfurling like green whips, hungry and ready. Harry found himself pulled toward the side of the hall where McGonagall had formed a knot of senior fighters. Her eyes flicked over him once, sharp as a scan of injuries. "You will not do anything reckless," she said, which was absurd because what else had he ever done? Harry opened his mouth. Hermione spoke first. "Professor, Harry needs to." McGonagall cut her off with a raised hand, not unkindly, but firmly. "Miss Granger, I am aware there are matters beyond this hall, but in the next hour the only matter is whether we live." Another impact. The torches guttered. The ceiling's illusion rippled, and for a moment the sky above looked like cracked glass. Kingsley's voice carried. "They're at the outer wards." As if to answer, a wave of cold swept through the hall, and with it came a sound like laughter dragged across gravel. Several students gasped, clutching at their chests. "Dementors," Lupin said, and his wand came up. A silver shape burst from its tip, a wolf, sleek and bright, bounding through the air, driving the cold back in a rush. Harry's own wand was in his hand before he thought. He cast his Patronus and a stag erupted into the hall, luminous and furious. It galloped toward the doors, and where it passed, shoulders uncurled, people inhaled as if they'd forgotten how. Tonks shot Harry a glance, something like gratitude and something like sorrow in it. "Good," she said tightly. "We'll need it." The doors slammed inward as if struck by a giant fist. The wood groaned. Iron hinges screamed. For a heartbeat, the great hall held. Then the doors burst apart in a spray of splinters and dust, and the world outside poured in. Not Death Eaters, not yet. First came wind and smoke, a swirl of ash so thick it turned torchlight into dull ember. Then shapes in the murk, spiders the size of hounds, their legs clicking on stone, eyes catching light like wet coins. Students shrieked. Spells flashed, hitting Titan with sizzling cracks. "Hole!" McGonagall barked. A professor, Slughorn pale as milk, threw a curse that sent an acromantula tumbling backward, legs flailing. Neville and Seamus fired in tandem, blasting another apart with a wet pop that turned Hermione green for a second before she forced herself forward again. And then, through the smoke, a giant silhouette loomed, enormous and obscene against the broken doorway. Its club smashed down, and the stone threshold exploded outward. The shockwave sent people stumbling. Harry hit the floor hard. Breath knocked from him, and for a moment he tasted nothing but grit. He heard Ron yelling, Hermione's voice, McGonagall's sharp commands. He pushed up, coughing, eyes watering. Flitwick stood on a bench, wand lifted, tiny against the ruin, and his voice rang out. High, fierce, precise. The air in front of the giant shimmered and hardened into something invisible but solid. The club struck it and bounced, the impact shuddering through the hall but not breaking through. The giant roared, spittle flying. Behind it, the smoke shifted, and Harry saw movement. Cloaked figures, wands drawn, faces pale and excited. Death Eaters. For a second, Harry's scar flared, and in his mind he felt Voldemort's attention brush past, like a cold hand stroking the back of his neck. Not here, not yet. Watching from somewhere else, waiting for a moment, savoring the chaos like a feast. The Death Eaters raised their wands in unison. A volley of curses streaked forward, green and red and black, and the great hall erupted into war. Spells made the air feel crowded. They left trails like burning threads, snapped them, stitched new patterns. Harry found himself fighting without thinking, body remembering what his mind couldn't hold. A curse whistled past his ear, hot as a thrown stone. He ducked, rolled, came up behind an overturned table and fired back. A Death Eater fell, mask clanging on the floor. Another surged forward, screaming something incoherent, and was stopped by Molly Weasley with a spell that slammed him into the wall so hard the stones groaned. Hermione was beside Harry, hair escaping its tie, face set in a grim line. She conjured a barricade of chairs that snapped into place like teeth, then sent a jet of fire along the floor that forced spiders back in a frantic, skittering wave. Ron stood to Harry's left, ears red, jaw clenched, hurling curses that hit with blunt force. Between them and the chaos at the shattered doors, McGonagall moved like a storm contained in a human shape. Her wand flicked and soldiers of armor marched, clanking and relentless, forming a line that met the intruders with steel fists and enchanted blades. "Get them away from the walls," Flitwick shouted, voice thin but urgent. Harry didn't understand until the next impact hit, a deep, rolling concussion that seemed to come from beneath the floor. The great hall's stone under Harry's palms vibrated. Somewhere high above, a crack widened with a sound like tearing cloth. The castle, Harry realized with a sick jolt, wasn't only being attacked at its doors. Something was hitting it at its bones. Outside, the giant roared again, but the sound was drowned by a new noise, a sustained, grinding rumble, like a mountain shifting. The enchanted ceiling shimmered and the storm cloud illusion peeled back for a heartbeat, revealing not sky but a rain of sparks and debris. A chunk of masonry, already aflame, plunged past the illusion as if falling from a great height. Hermione's eyes widened. The towers! Another tremor. Several students shrieked as the floor bucked. A chandelier swung wildly, chains creaking. One chain snapped, and the chandelier crashed down in a shower of glass and flame. People scattered, swearing, crying. Harry's scar burned. The sensation came with a certainty. Voldemort was doing this deliberately. Not just sending bodies to storm the school. He was trying to break the place itself. A Death Eater's laugh cut through the din. "Bring it down! Bring it down! Bring it down!" The words echoed in Harry's head, absurd and blasphemous. Hogwarts was supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to outlast governments, outlast wars. It held the bones of 1,000 childhoods. And yet the stone beneath his hands shook like an animal in pain. They pushed the attackers back from the hall's center, but each step they gained felt borrowed. The shattered doorway was a wound that wouldn't close. More poured in, masked faces, wild eyes, curses that hissed like snakes. Then a spell hit the far wall, black, pulsing, and the stones didn't just crack. They seemed to rot, spreading darkness in a spidering pattern, as if the curse was eating the castle from within. "Counter curse!" Hermione shouted, already moving. Her wand traced a tight circle, her voice clear. The rot slowed, fought her, then halted with a hiss like steam. Harry stared. What was that? Hermione's face was pale. "I don't know. I've never..." She swallowed. It felt old. A sound rose outside. Not a roar, not a scream, but something like chanting carried by wind. Harry's stomach clenched with instinctive dread. McGonagall's eyes went to the ceiling. "They're working on the wards," she said, and it wasn't a guess. It was a sentence handed down. "They found a way to worry them open." Kingsley's voice was grim. "Then we stop them, or we die inside a tomb." The next tremor was so violent that the great hall's doors at the far end, leading deeper into the castle, swung open as if the castle itself was trying to flee. They couldn't hold the great hall forever. Harry felt it in the way their line bent under pressure, in the way every spell cast seemed to cost more, like drawing water from a well that was going dry. Somewhere along the right side of the hall, a student cried out and collapsed, clutching their arm where a curse had grazed. Madame Pomfrey appeared as if conjured, face set, hands firm, hollowing the injured back behind a pillar. "Potter!" McGonagall's voice snapped through the noise, a whip crack. "If there is something you must do, do it now. Because in 10 minutes, there may be no corridors left to run through." "No, Harry's mouth went dry. Hermione looked at him, and in her eyes he saw she knew. She had always known there were things he wasn't saying. "We need to find the diadem," Hermione said quickly near his ear. "Ravenclaw's diadem. The room." "Not now," Ron said. But it wasn't refusal. It was fear trying to sound like sense. Harry looked toward the broken doorway again. Beyond the smoke he could see shadowy movement, and for a heartbeat he thought he saw the curve of a snake, immense and pale, vanishing behind rubble. Nagini. The thought punched cold through him. He forced himself back to the present. "We go," he decided, and the words felt like betrayal and necessity at the same time. "We go now." Hermione nodded once. Ron's face twisted, but he nodded too. They slipped along the hall's edge, dodging curses, using pillars for cover. Ginny appeared in their path like fire given a body. "Where are you going?" she demanded, and her voice broke on the last word. Harry didn't want to tell her. He didn't want to make her carry that fear. But there wasn't time for careful kindness. "I have to," he said. "There's something we need to end him." Ginny's eyes flashed. "And you think we're just going to?" A crash cut her off. The far end of the Great Hall wall bulged inward, stone cracking as if something enormous had struck from outside. People screamed. The crack widened and chunks of masonry fell in a cascade. Ginny stared at the widening fissure, then back at Harry. In the torchlight her freckles looked like flecks of ash. "Come back," she said, and it wasn't a request. It was an order from someone who had loved him through too many farewells. Harry touched her hand briefly, a scrap of contact he could carry like a talisman. Then, he was moving again. They burst through the side door into the corridor beyond, and the sound shifted. The great hall's battle became a muffled roar behind them, replaced by the eerie groaning of the castle itself. The corridor was filled with students running, teachers barking orders, ghosts drifting through walls with faces pale and wide. Nearly headless, Nick hovered near the ceiling, his head wobbling on its nearly severed neck. "It's dreadful," he said, voice quavering. "Simply dreadful. I haven't felt the castle this upset since." He stopped as another tremor rattled the corridor, and dust puffed from between stones like the castle was exhaling. "Since when?" Ron demanded. Nick's eyes went distant. "Since the founders argued," he whispered. "When the seams were first stitched." Hermione's face went tight. "That's not possible." "Ghosts remember different things," Nick murmured. "We remember feelings. They ran." The staircase ahead shifted violently, not with playful mischief but with panicked urgency. And for the first time, Harry saw the castle's magic working against itself, trying to rearrange, to escape structural failure, to move weight off places that were cracking. A portrait shouted at them, "Go left!" and another screamed, "No, no, the West Wing!" The air was full of conflicting warnings. Neville appeared again, breathless. "The bridge is gone," he gasped. "The wooden one, blown clean off. And the viaduct, there's cracks, huge ones." Hermione's eyes widened. "How?" "The wards." Neville shook his head, wild-eyed. "They hit the wards with something that isn't just a spell. It's like they've got anchors, like they're pulling from the ground." Harry's scar burned again. Voldemort's delight curled through him, and Harry tasted it like poison on his tongue. Not just victory, but desecration. They reached the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy, and Neville shoved it aside. The wall rippled, opening. The room of requirements swallowed them again. The room answered their desperation with a mouthful of clutter. It became the place where things were hidden, stacks of broken desks, heaps of tarnished trophies, piles of old cauldrons, the detritus of centuries. The air was thick with dust and the dry smell of forgotten paper. Somewhere in the darkness, something scuttled. Rats, or something worse that had made its home among abandoned secrets. Harry's stomach sank. The room stretched impossibly, a cavern of lost things under a ceiling that vanished into shadow. Finding a diadem in this was like finding a needle in a mountain of needles. "We need to split up," Hermione said, already scanning the heaps. "No," Harry said, more sharply than he intended, and the image of Malfoy Manor flashed, being separated, being hunted in pieces. "Stay close." Ron looked up at the towering stacks. "How did you even hide anything in here without dying of old age?" Hermione's voice was tight. "Someone did. Someone found it once. Me." Harry's mind flicked to the memory of his own earlier visit. 6th year, the Half-Blood Prince's book, the cabinet, the diadem glimpsed on an ugly bust. He tried to summon the image, but it was like trying to hold smoke. Everything had changed since then. The room itself felt different, restless, as if the battle above had seeped into its magic. Then came a sound from somewhere behind them. Footsteps, hurried, and a voice. "Harry!" It was Draco Malfoy, stumbling into the room like a man pushed by fate. Behind him were Crabbe and Goyle, heavier, wild-eyed, wands drawn with the shaky certainty of boys pretending they were men. Ron's wand snapped up. Hermione stepped forward, protective without thinking. Malfoy's pale face was slick with sweat. His eyes darted past Harry as if looking for an escape route even while speaking. "You have to... my parents..." He swallowed. "I didn't." A tremor cut him off. The entire room shivered. Something fell somewhere far off with a booming crash. Harry's scar stabbed. He felt... distantly, the castle groaning again, like a living thing trying not to die. Malfoy flinched at the sound, and for an instant Harry saw the child he'd been at 11, arrogant and safe, replaced by someone terrified of becoming collateral in a war he'd helped feed. Hermione spoke first, voice sharp. "Why are you here?" Crabbe's lips curled, his eyes bright with spite. "He's here for you," he said, and the lie was too quick. "The Dark Lord wants you. We'll bring you to him." Harry felt the room tilt, the air sharpening. He saw Ron's knuckles white on his wand, Hermione's face set in a mask of control. Malfoy's voice came out ragged. "Crabbe, don't." Crabbe didn't listen. He raised his wand, and Harry saw the hunger in him, the desire to finally matter. The kind of desire that made monsters out of boys. A curse flew. Hermione deflected it with a burst of sparks. Ron fired back. The room exploded into chaos, spells flashing between towering piles, debris raining down as curses struck and shattered stacked furniture and glass cases. Harry dodged behind a heap of old wardrobes. He saw for a heartbeat the bust, the ugly stone head wearing a tarnished tiara. The diadem. There, half buried among rubbish. His heart lurched. "Hermione!" he shouted. But Crabbe screamed something guttural, something not taught at Hogwarts, and fire erupted from his wand. Fire that wasn't ordinary flame. It moved like an animal, licking and snarling, blue-white at its core, devouring everything it touched with greedy speed. Hermione's eyes went wide with horror. Fiendfyre! The name was a curse itself. The fire surged, rolling over piles, swallowing wood and cloth and metal with equal ease. The heat hit Harry like a wall. Smoke clawed at his throat. The room's ceiling seemed lower, oppressive, as if even the magic of the room couldn't contain what had been unleashed. Ron grabbed Hermione's hand. "Run!" Harry's eyes locked on the diadem. It sat on the bust, like a crown on a corpse, gleaming faintly through smoke. He lunged. The heat was alive. It had intent. It wanted to eat. Harry sprinted through choking smoke, eyes stinging, lungs burning. The fiendfyre moved in waves, sprouting shapes, serpents made of flame, talons, jaws snapping as they surged across the rubble. He could hear Hermione shouting spells behind him, trying to contain the fire, trying to tame what could not be tamed. Ron was yelling too, words lost in crackling roar. Harry reached the bust. The diadem was hot to the touch even before he grabbed it, as if it resented being taken. He snatched it, nearly dropping it when it scorched his fingers through his glove. The metal felt wrong, too cold at the center, like ice hidden under burn. He turned and saw the path behind him was gone, swallowed by flame. Panic rose, thick and brutal. The room's endlessness became a trap. The fire wasn't only consuming objects, it was consuming the air, the exits, the very idea of escape. "Harry!" Hermione's voice cut through the roar, raw with terror. He spotted them through the smoke, Hermione and Ron clinging to each other, wands up. Malfoy a few paces away, frozen in shock. Goyle blundered near a pile, eyes huge, while Crabbe laughed hysterically, not understanding what had done. A burning, beast-shaped wave surged toward Crabbe. His laughter snapped into a scream. Malfoy lunged, grabbing him, but the fire snapped its jaws and Crabbe stumbled back, losing his balance on the shifting heaps. "No!" Malfoy shouted, and in that one word Harry heard a plea not for Crabbe, but for himself, for the version of him that hadn't become this. Crabbe fell. The fire swallowed him, and the scream ended too quickly. The room shook. Not just with battle tremors now. This was internal, violent, like the room was tearing itself apart to expel the corruption inside it. Whole stacks toppled. A rain of cursed objects and splintered wood crashed down. Goyle shrieked, stumbling into the path of a flaming serpent. Ron shouted a spell that blasted the floor between Goyle and flame, buying a heartbeat. Hermione's eyes met Harry's through smoke. She saw the diadem in his hand, and relief and horror collided in her face. "Ah! Ah!" Ron yelled suddenly. "Ugh! Look!" Above, near the ceiling, brooms hung in midair. Hundreds of them suspended among the clutter like a frozen flock. The room, in its frantic intelligence, had provided tools for escape. Harry shoved the diadem into his robes and sprinted. He grabbed a broom, coughing, eyes streaming. Hermione seized one too. Ron yanked another free. "Malfoy!" Harry shouted, and it felt insane, the idea of saving him. But the war had blurred lines until they were only choices. "Get on!" Malfoy hesitated. Then the fire surged again, and fear made his decision. He grabbed a broom and hauled himself up, dragging Goyle with him. They kicked off as the floor erupted, flames surging upward in a towering plume. The broom shot through smoke, weaving between collapsing stacks. Fiendfyre chased them like a predator, snapping at their heels, roaring with fury. Harry's broom bucked as hot air rose. He gripped tight, knuckles aching. Below, the fire devoured centuries of hidden things, a hungry god in a room that had always been safe. They burst through the doorway as it rippled open, spilling out into a corridor, and the room slammed shut behind them like a fist, cutting off the roar. For a heartbeat they hovered, gasping, smoke pouring from their mouths. Harry's hair was singed. Hermione's face was smeared black. Ron looked as if he'd been punched by the world. Malfoy slid off his broom and collapsed against the wall, shaking. Goyle sat on the floor, sobbing in thick, ugly heaves. Hermione grabbed Harry's wrist. "Did you—" Harry pulled the diadem from his robes. Even in the dim corridor light it glinted, beautiful and terrible. Hermione's eyes closed briefly, as if in pain. Ron stared. "That's it. That's it," Harry said, and he felt no triumph. Only the sick awareness of how close they'd come to dying beneath mountains of forgotten junk. Behind them, through stone, the castle groaned again. Louder this time, longer, as if it were drawing breath for a scream. There was no time to breathe. The corridor they'd spilled into was slanting, subtly, horribly, as if the floor itself had begun to shift under structural strain. Harry felt it in his knees, in the way dust slid in thin streams toward a crack that hadn't been there a minute ago. Hermione's gaze snapped upward. "We have to destroy it," she said. "Now." "How?" Ron demanded, voice hoarse. Fiendfyre was the how, and it nearly killed us. Harry's mind flashed through options like a frantic hand rifling drawers. Basilisk, venom. Sword of Gryffindor. He'd used the fang on the diary. He'd watched venom destroy Horcruxes with brutal certainty. "The chamber," he said. "We need a fang." Ron went pale. "The Chamber of Secrets." Hermione's lips pressed into a line. "It's the only sure way." A new sound rose, boots pounding, shouting. A group of Death Eaters rounded the corner at the far end of the corridor, wands raised, masks gleaming like skulls. Harry's heart lurched. "Go!" They ran, the diadem burning cold against Harry's ribs through his robes. Hermione kept glancing over her shoulder as if she could see the weight of the castle pressing down. Ron's face was set, grim and furious. They ducked down a side stairwell, spiraling, the air growing colder as they descended. Above, the battle's roar surged and fell like waves. Now and then, a shockwave rattled the stairs, and Harry imagined stones shifting, aligning, breaking. As they reached a landing, a portrait screamed, "They're on the 7th floor?" And another shouted, "The East Wing is falling!" The words hit Harry like physical blows. Falling. The castle falling. They burst into a corridor near the entrance to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. The tiles were cracked. Water ran in thin streams down the walls as if pipes had been severed. The air smelled damp and faintly of mildew, a mundane smell in a world of smoke and blood. Myrtle appeared over a sink, translucent and indignant. "Honestly," she wailed, "the noise! Some of us are trying to have a dreadful evening in peace." Hermione didn't waste breath. "Myrtle, we need to get into the Chamber of Secrets." Myrtle's face brightened with awful curiosity. "Oh," she said, drawing the word out. "Oh, you're going down there again. I knew you would. Everyone always comes back. It's like a nasty habit." "Nah." Harry didn't argue. He strode to the sink, heart pounding, and hissed in parcel tongue. The serpent carved into the tap gleamed, then the sink began to move. With a grinding moan, it slid aside, revealing the dark hole. From below came a gust of cold air, stale and old. The smell of death, ancient and preserved. Ron swallowed hard. "I hate this," he said, but he climbed onto the edge anyway, looking at Harry as if to confirm Harry was real. "I really, really hate this." Hermione's hand squeezed Ron's arm, quick, fierce. "Me too." They dropped. The slide was slick with moisture. Harry's stomach rose into his throat. He tried to keep the diadem from slamming against his chest. They shot down faster than gravity should allow, and then tumbled onto cold stone at the bottom. The Chamber of Secrets greeted them with silence heavy as water. The giant snake statue loomed in the dim light from their wands. The air tasted stale, as if no breath had stirred it since the last time Harry had been here. Bones crunched underfoot, old ones brittle. Harry's wand light caught the pale curve of a fang half buried in grime, still wickedly sharp. Hermione's eyes fixed on it as if it were salvation. "There," she whispered. Harry reached for it, and the chamber shuddered violently. A crack like thunder split the air. Dust poured from the ceiling in sheets. Ron's eyes went wide. "That wasn't outside," he breathed. "That was this place." Hermione's face drained. "The foundations," she said, voice thin. "Harry, if the castle is collapsing..." Harry gripped the fang anyway, because what else was there to grip when the world was breaking? Harry set the diadem on a slab of stone, its delicate points catching wand light like cold stars. It looked absurdly fine in the grim chamber, like a queen's crown dropped in a crypt. Hermione stood over it, hands shaking. Ron hovered close, jaw clenched so tightly Harry could see the muscle working. "Do it," Hermione said, but her voice was not a command. It was a plea to time itself. Harry raised the basilisk fang. For a heartbeat he hesitated, because part of him still couldn't fully accept that something so beautiful was a vessel for something so rotten. But beauty had never been proof of goodness. Voldemort had been handsome once too. He drove the fang down. The diadem screamed. Not aloud, not in the air, but in Harry's skull, in his bones, in the scar that flared like a brand. A shriek of rage, of violated pride. Black smoke poured from the metal, thick and writhing, forming a face that wasn't quite a face. Something sharp, twisted, hateful. It hovered for a second, fighting to exist. Then the basilisk venom ate it. The smoke hissed and shrank, sucked back into nothing. The diadem split, jewels cracking, metal buckling, as if the venom had melted the very idea of it. Harry yanked the fang out. His hand was trembling. Hermione exhaled a broken sound that might have been a sob. Ron sank against the statue's base, closing his eyes as if he'd been holding them open by force. For a moment, the chamber was still again. Then the castle groaned overhead, deep, sustained, terrible. The stone under their feet vibrated like a drum struck hard. Hermione looked up. "We have to get out," she said urgently. "No." They scrambled toward the pipe opening, slipping on damp stone. Harry clutched another fang on instinct, shoving it into his robes, because if the castle wasn't done breaking, they might need every weapon they could steal from its corpse. They climbed into the pipe and began the slick, frantic ascent. Halfway up, another shockwave hit. The pipe shook, and Harry's shoulders slammed into the side. He heard Ron swear behind him. Hermione gasped, breath forced out. The pipe groaned like it might shear. Water sprayed from a crack, cold and stinging. "Faster!" Hermione cried. They shot out of the sink and hit the bathroom floor hard, coughing, limbs tangled. Myrtle shrieked overhead. "Stop making such a mess!" The corridor outside the bathroom was chaos. Smoke drifted in from somewhere, and the floor was littered with rubble. A section of wall had collapsed, revealing the bare bones of the castle's interior, pipes, beams, broken enchantments sparking faintly like dying stars. A group of students ran past carrying an injured boy on a makeshift stretcher. Someone shouted for Professor Sprout. Another voice screamed, "The West Tower's down!" The words were barely believable. The West Tower had always been there. It was a fact like gravity. Harry stumbled into the corridor and looked down its length. Through a broken archway he could see outside, night air full of ash, the grounds lit by curses like sick fireworks. A portion of the battlements had collapsed inward. Somewhere, a huge shape moved. Another giant, its silhouette staggered by blows and spells. Above the main body of the castle, a plume of flame rose as if Hogwarts itself had been lit like a pyre. Hermione grabbed Harry's sleeve, pulling him back from the archway as debris fell. "We need to find out what's happening," she said, voice strained. "The Horcrux is gone, but Harry, the castle." Harry's scar pulsed, and with it came a thread of Voldemort's thought, satisfaction, hunger, a sense of control. And beneath that, something more. A plan unfolding, deliberate. He wasn't merely attacking the defenders. He was tearing down their world. "Voldemort's doing this," Harry said, voice low. "He wants it destroyed." Ron stared at him, eyes wide. "Why?" "He wanted to rule. He wanted Hogwarts." No. Bah. Harry swallowed. "Not anymore," he said, and the realization was ice. He doesn't want to rule a school. He wants to erase what it means. A scream echoed from farther down the corridor. A burst of green light flashed, then died. Harry's heart lurched. They ran toward it. They reached a junction where the corridor opened into a stairwell overlooking a courtyard. The view hit Harry like a punch. The courtyard had been a place of snowball fights and awkward first kisses and students hurrying to class. Now it was a cratered killing ground. Stones were torn up, statues shattered, the fountain smashed into jagged fragments. Curses arced overhead like poisonous comets. Bodies lay sprawled in shapes that made Harry's stomach revolt. On the far side, a section of the castle wall was simply gone. Not breached, gone. As if a giant bite had been taken out of Hogwarts, exposing rooms like torn flesh. Classrooms with desks half visible, tapestries fluttering in the wind. Staircases ending in open air. Hermione made a strangled sound. Ron's face went gray. A group of Death Eaters clustered near the breach, wands raised toward the exposed stone. They weren't aiming at people. They were aiming at the castle's seams. Their voices rose in a low, rhythmic chant that made Harry's skin prickle. Ancient magic, Neville had said. Anchors, pulling from the ground. At the courtyard's edge, Flitwick and McGonagall stood together, casting in tandem, threads of light weaving, trying to knit the broken wall, trying to reinforce what was left. Their faces were strained, sweat shining on their brows. They looked small against the scale of destruction, like two people trying to hold up the sky. Then the ground beneath the Death Eaters glowed, dark runes flaring with sickly purple light. The air thickened. The stones of the castle groaned. Hermione's voice was tight with horror and recognition. "That's not just them," she breathed. That's a ritual. They're using the ley lines." No. "How do you know?" Ron demanded, eyes wild. "I read," Hermione snapped automatically, then flinched as the words felt ridiculous. "But, Harry, they're trying to unmake the foundations. Hogwarts wards are anchored to the ground. If they poison the anchor points..." A sound like a scream rose from the castle itself. The stairwell shook. The banister cracked down the middle, splitting like a bone. Dust filled the air so thick Harry tasted grit between his teeth. Harry's scar flared again, Voldemort's pleasure, bright and sharp. "We have to stop them," Harry said, and it came out like a vow. "But the battle," Ron began. Hermione's eyes flashed. "If the castle falls, everyone inside dies anyway." They bolted down the stairs, taking them two at a time. Spells exploded nearby. Chunks of stone rained down. A suit of armor crashed from a landing above, clanging and sparking as it shattered. Harry barely dodged. They burst into the courtyard, air cold and thick with smoke. The chant was louder now, a bass thrum in the bones. The Death Eaters turned as they approached, masks gleaming, wands lifting. Hermione raised her wand. Ron did too. Harry felt the familiar focus settle. Fight. Survive. Protect. They fired. Spells struck the chanting circle, disrupting it. One Death Eater flew backward, slamming into rubble. Another staggered, curse breaking mid-word. The glowing runes flickered, then surged again, as if angered. A masked woman's laugh rang out, Bellatrix, bright and unhinged. She stepped from behind a broken statue, eyes shining with feral joy. "Oh, look," she sang. "The children have come to play in the ruins." Hermione's face went white. Ron made a sound like an animal. Bellatrix's wand flicked toward them, and a curse flew, not aimed at their bodies but at the ground between them. The stone erupted, splitting, a fissure yawning open like a mouth. Harry skidded, barely stopping himself from plunging into the crack. He looked down and saw darkness dropping away, a glimpse of lower levels exposed, shattered corridors and dripping pipes. Bellatrix smiled, showing teeth. "Fall," she whispered. The fissure widened. Behind them the castle groaned. Then a tower somewhere above collapsed with a roar, sending a rain of stone into the night like the bones of a giant. Harry threw himself sideways as the crack tore outward. Hermione grabbed his wrist, hauling him back with a strength born of panic. Ron stumbled, caught himself, nearly slipping on loose stones. Bellatrix's laughter rose with the dust. "Careful, careful. Hogwarts has teeth tonight." The chant faltered as more Death Eaters turned to defend the ritual circle. Curses flew. Hermione deflected a green bolt with a shield that shivered under impact. Ron's spell struck a mask dead on, sending the wearer tumbling into rubble. Harry's eyes darted, searching for the runes, for the anchors, for anything that could be broken. The ground itself glowed in places like infected wounds. The castle's walls seemed to breathe, cracks widening and closing. He spotted a Death Eater standing at the circle's edge, hands extended, feeding power into the runes like a man pouring poison into a well. Harry aimed and fired a stunning spell. It hit. The Death Eater crumpled. The glow dimmed, just for a moment. Then Bellatrix flicked her wand again, and a jet of purple light struck the circle. The runes flared bright, and the air slammed against Harry's chest as if something invisible had detonated. The courtyard bucked. Hermione screamed. Ron grabbed her arm. From the breach in the castle wall, stones began to fall, not in chunks, but in sheets, as if the wall was dissolving. A corridor inside crumpled like paper. A staircase tore free and collapsed into the dark. "No!" McGonagall's voice rang out from somewhere above, sharp with rage and grief. Harry's scar blazed, and Voldemort's thoughts snapped through him. Cold, triumphant, let it break. Harry felt sick. Hogwarts wasn't just being damaged. It was being systematically undone, its protections inverted, its ancient magic turned against itself. A desecration more intimate than murder. Hermione's voice broke through, raw. "Harry, look!" She pointed past the Death Eaters. On the far side of the courtyard, where the ground sloped toward the lake, a line of hooded figures advanced. Dementors, gliding like rot made visible. The air chilled instantly. Hope dimmed in the chest. Harry cast his Patronus again, stag blazing, charging toward the Dementors. Several recoiled, but more poured in behind them, an endless tide of cold. Bellatrix's eyes lit with delight. "Yes," she whispered, almost reverent. "Let the joy die first." Ron's face was contorted with effort as he cast his own Patronus, a silver terrier that leapt barking into the night. Hermione's otter flashed out too, bright but trembling. Harry saw students retreating, some dropping their wands, sobbing as the cold stole their will. He saw a professor fall to their knees, hands pressed to temples. He saw a pair of armor soldiers collapse as their enchantment faltered under despair. And through it all, the runes continued to glow. Harry's mind raced. He needed to break the ritual, sever the anchors, disrupt whatever dark geometry they had drawn into Hogwarts' foundations. He didn't know enough. Hermione might, but Hermione was barely holding the Patronus. A figure lunged from the smoke. Neville, face streaked with blood and dust, sword in hand. He ran straight at the chanting circle like a man who had decided death was negotiable. "Neville!" Hermione shouted. Neville didn't look back. He swung the sword down, cleaving a line through glowing runes carved into stone. Sparks erupted. The chant shattered into screams as the severed rune line flared and died. For one heartbeat, the courtyard stilled. Then the ground cracked again, vicious and retaliatory, and Neville lost his footing, sliding toward the fissure. Harry moved without thought, diving, grabbing Neville's wrist. The sword clanged against stone. Neville's fingers tightened around Harry's forearm, desperate. Bellatrix screamed in rage. "No! New little mud!" Her curse flew. Harry didn't see where it hit. He felt the air change, the pressure shift, and above them a section of the castle wall, already weakened, began to collapse outward, toward the courtyard. Toward them, toward everyone. Hermione's eyes went huge. "Harry!" Harry hauled Neville up as the world above them fell. Stone fell like the end of the world. Harry rolled, dragging Neville with him. Ron yanked Hermione backward by the sleeve. They sprinted, stumbling over rubble as chunks of masonry crashed down behind them, each impact sending shockwaves through the ground. Dust exploded upward in choking clouds. A scream cut off abruptly. The collapsing wall didn't just crush what it hit, it tore open more of the castle's interior. Floors buckled. A classroom collapsed into the level below. Harry caught a glimpse of a blackboard tumbling through open air, chalk still scrawled with half-finished lessons before it vanished in a rain of debris. Neville coughed, eyes streaming. "Did it work?" he rasped. Hermione's face was gray with dust. "It disrupted one line," she said, voice shaking. "But there are more. Merlin, they've laced the whole perimeter." Bellatrix's laughter returned, but it was edged now, furious. "Break it all you like," she hissed. "It's already dying." Harry's Patronus stag wavered as the dust and cold thickened. The Dementors drew closer, feeling weakness. Harry forced himself to think of warmth, of light, of things that weren't crumbling. He thought of the Burrow's kitchen smell. He thought of Sirius laughing. He thought of Dobby's fierce loyalty. The stag brightened, charging again, driving the nearest Dementors back. But the castle groaned. A deeper sound rolled through the night, a sustained rumble that made Harry's teeth vibrate. It came from everywhere and nowhere, like the foundations themselves were shifting. Hermione looked up at the breach, at the exposed stone. Her eyes widened with sudden, terrible understanding. "The wards are breaking in layers," she whispered. "They're not snapping. They're unthreading." Ron stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means," Hermione said, and her voice was barely audible over the roar, "that when the last thread goes, it won't just be a collapse. It will be a cascade. Everything anchored to the wards, staircases, enchanted supports, the way the castle holds itself together, will fail at once." Harry felt cold spread through him, deeper than Dementor cold. He imagined hundreds of people inside. Children. Fighters. Teachers. Buried alive in a place that had raised them. "We have to get people out," he said. "And if we leave the ritual intact, it follows," Hermione replied, voice cracking. "They'll pull it down with everyone still inside." A shadow moved near the fallen wall. From behind rubble, a figure stumbled. An older student, face bloodied, dazed. He blinked at the scene like waking into hell. A curse hit him from the side. He fell without a sound. Harry's stomach heaved. Fury surged hot and wild. He turned toward the Death Eaters again, toward Bellatrix's gleaming eyes, and for a moment he didn't care about Horcruxes, or missions, or strategy. He wanted to end the laughter. Ron grabbed his shoulder hard. "Harry!" he shouted. "Look!" Ron pointed past the courtyard, toward the main body of the castle. The astronomy tower, already cracked, already smoking, shuddered. Harry watched as an entire section split away, stone peeling from stone, and then the top half of the tower sagged as if bending in grief. It didn't fall yet. It leaned, suspended in a moment that felt impossible. Then it began to go. The crash shook the grounds. A wave of dust rolled out, blotting the world. The sound was so huge it swallowed screams. For a heartbeat, all fighting paused. Even Bellatrix turned her head, mesmerized by the destruction. Harry heard, faintly, from inside the castle, the distant roar of the crowd. Panic spreading. This was no longer a battle for Hogwarts. This was a race against its death. Harry seized Neville's arm. "Go," he said. "Get to McGonagall. Tell her the castle's failing. Tell her to evacuate." Neville's eyes flared. "I'm not leaving." "You're not leaving," Harry snapped, and the force in his voice surprised even him. "Your warning. That's fighting." Neville hesitated, then nodded once, fierce and grim. He sprinted toward the shattered entrance, sword raised like a torch. Hermione grabbed Harry's sleeve. "What are you doing?" Harry's scar burned again, Voldemort's presence closer, attention narrowing like a blade. Harry could feel him turning, sensing the shift, tasting the castle's agony and deciding how to savor it. Harry met Hermione's eyes. "I'm going to find him," he said. Ron's face went rigid. "No? Are you?" A fresh wave of cold swept over them. The Dementors were back, gliding closer. Harry's stag wavered. Hermione's voice shook. "Harry, if the castle collapses, then I end it before it does," Harry said, and he heard how impossible it sounded. Above them, Hogwarts groaned again, longer, louder, like a dying thing calling its name. They fought their way back toward the castle's interior, using broken corridors and half-collapsed archways as cover. The air inside was worse, thick with smoke and powdery stone. Every breath scraped. The castle's enchanted torches flickered in and out, like eyes blinking against pain. Harry's scar pulsed in a pattern that felt like a signal. Voldemort was close enough to taste. Not inside the walls. Outside, circling, waiting. Harry could sense his attention shifting from pure assault to anticipation, like a predator slowing because the prey was already wounded. They reached a stairwell that had once led cleanly upward. Now it was fractured, steps cracked, chunks missing. The staircase tried to rearrange itself, but the magic stuttered, failing, and the stones simply crumbled instead. Hermione looked at the broken steps, and then at Harry, eyes shining with fear. "We can't go that way." Ron peered upward. "We can go around, through the third-floor corridor." A shockwave interrupted him. The wall beside them split, and cold night air rushed in through a new jagged opening. Harry saw through it, the grounds and the dark press of enemies. He also saw something else. In the distance, a cluster of Death Eaters standing in a circle of their own, hands raised, chanting. Another anchor point. Hermione saw it too. Her face twisted. "They're everywhere," she whispered. Harry felt the hopelessness nibbling at the edge of his chest. A castle could endure a battle. It could endure curses and giants. But this was dismantling. Systematic. Patient. ... "Harry!" A voice called from farther down the corridor. It was Seamus Finnegan, face streaked with soot, hair singed. Behind him, Dean leaned against the wall, clutching his side. Seamus's eyes were wide. "McGonagall says everyone who isn't fighting is to evacuate now. The passage is jammed. There's a collapse near the statue corridor." Hermione's hand flew to her mouth. "People are trapped?" Seamus nodded sharply, jaw tight. "A bunch of first years, and..." His voice cracked. "And Professor Trelawney's up there too, throwing crystal balls at Death Eaters like she's gone mad." Ron let out a strangled laugh that turned into a cough. Harry made a decision. It wasn't the mission's clean line. It was the human one. "Show us," he said. They followed Seamus and Dean through corridors that felt increasingly unfamiliar. Not because the route was new, but because the castle was changing under strain. A painting that should have been on the left hung now on the right, crooked, its subject glaring in offended disbelief. A door that once led to a broom cupboard opened onto open air, nothing beyond but darkness and distant firelight. They reached the statue corridor and found it half buried. Stone blocks lay like fallen teeth, and the air was full of muffled cries. A small hand stuck out from under a slab, fingers twitching weakly. Hermione dropped to her knees without hesitation, wand already moving. "Wingardium Leviosa," she whispered, voice fierce. The slab lifted an inch, shuddering, then rose slowly as Hermione poured everything she had into the spell. Ron and Harry shoved rubble aside. Seamus helped, face set. A child crawled out, tiny, shaking, cheeks streaked with dust and tears. "It hurts," she whimpered. "It's all right," Hermione said, and her voice went soft in a way that made Harry's throat ache. "You're safe. You're safe." But the child wasn't safe. None of them were. The castle trembled again, and more debris shifted ominously. The corridor's ceiling cracked with a sound like snapping branches. "Move!" Harry shouted. They dragged children out one by one. 2 boys, a girl, then another girl with a cut on her forehead. Professor Trelawney appeared suddenly from behind a toppled statue, wild-eyed, clutching a crystal ball like a weapon. "The star is broken!" she cried. "The tower has fallen," I foretold. Professor, Hermione panted. Help us, please. Trelawney blinked, then scurried forward, surprisingly nimble, grabbing a child's arm and pulling. Then a scream rose from deeper under the rubble. Harry froze. The voice was older, strained. Help, please. Dean lurched forward. That's Lavender, he said, voice tight. Ron's face went grim. We can't. He looked up as the ceiling cracked further. We can't stay here. Harry's scar burned. Voldemort's attention brushed his mind again. Amused. Watch them choose. Harry clenched his jaw. We're getting her out, he said, and he didn't know if he was defying Voldemort or the collapsing world itself. Harry and Ron shoved at a slab that refused to move, their boots slipping on dust. Hermione's wand trembled as she tried to lift another piece of fallen masonry. Seamus crawled into a narrow gap, face disappearing into darkness, and shouted directions. Lavender! Dean called, voice cracking. Hold on! A tremor hit. The corridor bucked. Somewhere nearby, stone shattered. The ceiling crack widened, and a chunk fell, missing Harry by inches. It hit the floor with a thud that echoed in his bones. We're out of time! Ron shouted. Harry's lungs burned. He forced his hands under the slab again, ignoring the way stone scraped his knuckles raw. He pushed, harder, feeling muscle and will strain together. Hermione's spell lifted just enough, and Ron wedged his shoulder under the edge. The slab shifted. A gap opened, and Seamus's voice came out strained. Got her. Help me. Harry dropped to his knees, reaching into the darkness. His fingers closed around a wrist, warm, trembling. He pulled, Ron pulling beside him, Hermione supporting with magic as best she could. Lavender Brown emerged choking on dust, hair tangled, face streaked black. Her eyes were wide and glassy, and for a horrible heartbeat, Harry thought she was already gone. Then she coughed, hard, and sucked in air with a ragged sob. Dean let out a broken sound and grabbed her, holding her as if he could glue her back together. Hermione pressed her hand to Lavender's forehead, murmuring a healing charm. Lavender shivered, eyes rolling, but she stayed conscious. Get them out, Harry snapped at Seamus. To the passage. Seamus nodded, hauling 2 first-years to their feet. Trelawney shepherded another, muttering about omens and falling stars. Dean half-carried Lavender, swearing through tears. As they turned to run, the corridor screamed, stone groaning, cracking. The ceiling fracture raced like lightning. Harry looked up and saw, with icy clarity, that the corridor was about to collapse entirely. Go! He roared. They sprinted. Behind them, the ceiling gave way. A torrent of stone and dust crashed down, swallowing the corridor like a closing jaw. The impact threw Harry forward. He hit the floor, skidding, his wand flying from his hand. A ringing filled his ears. For a second he couldn't breathe. He tasted blood. He pushed up, vision blurred. Hermione was kneeling beside him, face panicked. Harry, can you move? Harry nodded, though his head swam. He grabbed his wand and stumbled to his feet. The corridor behind them was gone, a wall of rubble where a passage had been. The castle had erased it in seconds. Ron stared at the blockage, chest heaving. That could have been us. Harry's scar pulsed. Voldemort's satisfaction slid through him like oil. Yes, it could have. They ran again, because running was all anyone could do when the world was falling apart. They reached a larger hall where evacuees streamed toward a staircase that led down to Aberforth's passage. Teachers shouted instructions. Parents pushed children forward. Students stumbled under the weight of injured friends. The air was full of sobbing and spells. McGonagall stood at the top of the stairs, face set, directing traffic like a general. Her eyes found Harry instantly. What have you done? She demanded, but there was no time for accusation. Destroyed another Horcrux, Harry said quickly. But the castle, Professor, it's failing. They're using rituals on the foundations. The wards are unthreading. Nani. Bah. McGonagall's face tightened. For a moment, grief flickered through her eyes. Fast, hidden, like a candle in a storm. Then it was gone, replaced by iron. "Then we evacuate," she said, and her voice rang out. "All of you, anyone who cannot fight, leave now. Anyone who can, hold the corridors as long as you're able, but do not be foolish. Hogwarts will not be a grave for its children." A scream interrupted her, high and sudden. From the ceiling above the hall, cracks spread in a web. A massive stone beam shifted. McGonagall looked up, and something in her expression changed. An instant of helplessness. Then the beam began to fall. Harry moved before thought. He shoved a cluster of first-years forward, away from where the beam would land. Ron grabbed a girl by the collar and yanked her back. Hermione threw up a shield, Protego Maxima, her voice raw with effort. The beam fell. It hit the shield with a sound like the world breaking. Hermione's shield bowed under the weight, shimmering, cracking at the edges. Hermione staggered, knees buckling. Harry and Ron grabbed her elbows, bracing her. McGonagall's wand flashed, and the beam's fall slowed, the last few inches arrested by her magic and Hermione's combined. The beam hovered, trembling, then settled at an angle, partly supported, partly embedded in the floor like a spear. Dust filled the hall, making everyone cough and cry out. "Keep moving!" McGonagall shouted, voice hoarse. "Do not stop." The stream of evacuees surged again, frantic now. Harry watched a tiny boy clutching a stuffed Kneasel to his chest, eyes huge. He watched a mother, Muggle-born perhaps, holding her daughter with fierce desperation, lips moving in silent prayer. He watched Percy Weasley lift an injured man onto his shoulder and carry him down the stairs, face twisted with effort and guilt. Hermione's breathing was ragged. "Castle," she gasped. "Harry, it's accelerating." As if to answer, another tremor hit. Stronger. The floor tilted. People screamed. Someone slipped and fell down the stairs. Hands grabbed them, hauled them back up. Harry heard a sound like tearing fabric, and looked up to see the ceiling's enchanted sky ripple, then flicker out entirely. For a heartbeat, the Great Hall's magic, its illusion of open heavens, was gone. Above them was not sky but stone, cracked and shedding dust. The castle's magic was failing in public shamelessly. A roar rose from outside, Voldemort's voice, magnified, cutting through night like a blade. "You have fought valiantly," the voice echoed, cold and triumphant. "But you have lost. The castle falls. Your hope falls with it. Give me Harry Potter and you may live to crawl from the rubble." The words slammed into Harry's chest. For a second he felt every eye in the hall turn like pressure. McGonagall's face went white with rage. "Lies," she whispered, but her eyes flicked up at the ceiling cracks, and the lie was for them, not for herself. Harry's scar burned and he felt Voldemort's attention like a hook. Voldemort didn't know where Harry was exactly, but he knew he was inside. He was calling him out like a hunter calling prey from brush. Hermione gripped Harry's sleeve, nails biting. "Don't," she whispered fiercely, reading the shift in him. Ron shook his head, eyes wet. "Harry, mate, don't." Harry looked around at the evacuees, at the children, at the people trying to escape a collapsing school while war raged outside. Voldemort's voice had offered them a lie shaped like mercy. And the castle groaned again as if to say, "Choose quickly." Harry felt the weight of the diadem's destruction like a small victory in a sea of losses. One more Horcrux down. One left. Nagini. And Voldemort himself, finally mortal, still didn't know it. If the castle fell with everyone inside, victory meant nothing. Harry swallowed, throat raw. He leaned close to Hermione and Ron, forcing the words out through shaking breath. I think I have to go." Hermione's eyes filled instantly, fury and grief colliding. "No," she hissed. "No, you don't. We can't outfight a collapsing castle," Harry said. and his voice was terrifyingly calm. "Not like this." Ron grabbed Harry's collar, pulling him close. "We're coming with you." Harry stared at him. "No." Ron's face contorted. "Don't you dare." A fresh impact shook the hall. The beam they'd held shifted again, grinding. A wall cracked. Someone screamed. Harry closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He saw the forest in his mind. He saw the clearing. He saw himself walking alone. He opened his eyes. "This is the only way I can keep them alive," he said, and it felt like tearing himself in half. McGonagall's voice rang again, commanding. "Evacuate! Now!" Harry slipped into the moving crowd, pulling his invisibility cloak from his robes as quietly as he could. Hermione saw. Ron saw. Their faces shattered. Harry pulled the cloak over his head, and the world dimmed. He became a ghost among the living, moving toward the doors, toward the night, toward Voldemort's voice. Behind him, Hogwarts groaned, deep and long, and the sound followed him like a funeral bell. Under the cloak, Harry felt both invisible and horribly exposed. Every sound seemed louder. Boots scraping stones, sobs shouted orders, the brittle snap of magic failing. He slipped past clusters of fighters moving in the opposite direction, heading toward the battle with grim faces, as if they were walking into a storm they'd already accepted. He reached a side exit where the stone archway had cracked, the door hanging crooked on its hinges. Cold night air rushed in, thick with ash and the metallic tang of spellfire. Harry stepped out. The grounds were a nightmare painted in fire. Curses streaked across the dark like jagged lightning. Shadows fought shadows. Giants moved like mountains given hate. Somewhere, a werewolf's howl rose and was cut short. Harry kept low, moving along broken walls, staying close to shadows. His scar pulled him like a compass needle toward Voldemort's presence, out beyond the castle, near the forest's edge, where the darkness felt deeper. As he moved, he saw the castle from outside, and the sight nearly stopped his heart. Hogwarts was wounded. Not in one place, not in a way that could be repaired with time. The silhouette was wrong. Towers were missing. Entire sections leaned at unnatural angles, held up by magic that flickered like a failing heartbeat. Fires burned in windows where candlelight should have been. The grounds were littered with fallen stone, as if the castle had begun shedding pieces of itself. A tremor ran through the earth beneath Harry's feet. He stumbled, catching himself on a broken statue's base. The statue's face had been blasted away, leaving only a smooth, blank ruin. The castle groaned again, this time a deep, grinding sound that went on, like a great creature trying to crawl while its bones splintered. Harry's stomach twisted. He forced himself onward. Near the edge of the grounds, the air turned colder. Dementors drifted in clusters, repelled intermittently by patronuses that flared and faltered. Harry's stag had faded when he left the hall, but he kept his wand tight, ready to cast again if the cold pressed too close. He saw figures moving toward the forest too, Death Eaters, confident, as if they already smelled victory. They were giving the collapsing castle a wide berth, like men circling a sinking ship they intended to loot once it went under. Harry reached the tree line. The forbidden forest loomed, black and vast. He could hear creatures shifting within, the rustle of leaves like whispers. The darkness under the branches looked thicker than ordinary night. A gap in the trees opened ahead. A clearing. Torches burned there, held by masked figures. Harry could hear Voldemort's voice again, softer now, carrying intimate menace. "Bring him to me," Voldemort said, "and you will be spared." Harry stepped forward, and then stopped. Because he felt it, Voldemort's satisfaction, not only at the idea of Harry's surrender, but at something else unfolding behind him. Voldemort was not merely waiting for Harry. He was listening for the castle to die. He was timing his victory to the sound of falling stone. Harry's scar flared so sharply he nearly gasped. In the flare was an image, a thought not meant for him but leaking through their cursed connection. Dark runes glowing around the castle's perimeter, anchors set, threads being pulled. the wards unraveling like a tapestry ripped from a loom. Harry clenched his jaw until it hurt. He couldn't stop the anchors alone. He couldn't keep Hogwarts standing. But he could remove himself as Voldemort's focus, could force Voldemort to reveal Nagini, could end this while there was still anyone left to save. He stepped into the clearing. Torches turned. Masks lifted slightly. A hiss of recognition ran through the Death Eaters. Harry pulled off the cloak. The night hit him full, cold, and heavy. He stood exposed under torchlight, soot-streaked, hair singed, eyes burning. Voldemort's red gaze fixed on him like a blade. "There you are," Voldemort whispered, and the pleasure in his voice was almost tender. At last. Behind Voldemort, Nagini coiled within a shimmering protective sphere, her massive body gleaming, eyes bright and inhuman. Harry's stomach dropped. There she was, the last Horcrux, guarded like treasure. Harry's heart hammered. He forced his voice steady. "It ends tonight." Voldemort smiled, slow and cruel. "It ended the moment your school began to fall." As if summoned by the words, a colossal crash thundered from behind them. The ground shook. The torch flames bent in a sudden gust as air displaced by falling stone rushed outward across the grounds. Harry's breath caught. He turned his head just slightly, unable to stop himself. A huge portion of Hogwarts' upper structure, already leaning, gave way. In the distance, the silhouette of the castle shifted, collapsing inward in a cascade. The sound was not a single crash, but a rolling, grinding roar that went on and on, like the world being chewed. Voldemort watched Harry's reaction with delighted calm. "Listen," he murmured. "That is the sound of your childhood ending." Harry's throat tightened until it felt like it might close. He turned back, forcing himself not to look again. "You'll still die," he said, and the words tasted like ash. "And it won't matter what you broke." Voldemort's smile widened, just a fraction. "Kill him," he said softly, and raised the Elder Wand. Harry didn't raise his wand. The decision was a stone dropped into deep water, final, soundless, rippling outward. He felt the instinct to fight claw at him, ancient and primal. He let it pass through like wind through broken arches. Voldemort's eyes narrowed, as if disappointed by the simplicity of surrender. Then he lifted the wand with reverence, like a priest raising a sacred knife. Avada Kedavra. Green light filled the clearing. It hit Harry like a wave of cold brilliance, and then the world fell away. He was gone from his body in an instant, but not into darkness. He landed in a place that felt like being inside a thought. The air was clean. The light was pale and endless. He saw in the distance a shape that made his stomach twist. A small, broken thing under a chair, whimpering, raw and deformed. Voldemort's soul fragment. The piece that had lived inside Harry, screaming as it died. Harry turned away, heart aching with the weight of it. He saw Albus Dumbledore standing nearby, hands folded, face lined with sorrow. The place between life and death had no smoke, no ash, no falling stone. It was quiet enough to hear the blood and memory. "Is it?" Harry's voice sounded distant, as if spoken through water. Dumbledore's eyes were gentle. "You did what you came to do," he said. "The part of him that lived in you is destroyed." Harry's chest tightened. "Hogwarts," he whispered. "It's falling." Dumbledore's gaze flickered, and for the first time Harry saw something like pain cross it. "Yes," he said softly. "The castle is mortal, even if we pretended it wasn't." Harry swallowed. "Can it be saved?" Dumbledore's silence was answer enough. Harry's throat burned. "Then what was the point?" he demanded, sudden fury tearing through the quiet. "If everything." Dumbledore stepped closer. "The point," he said quietly, "is that Voldemort's power depends on fear and permanence. He wants the world to believe that when something beloved falls, it cannot rise again. He wants despair to be the only inheritance." Harry stared at him, breathing hard. "And if Hogwarts is gone, then its ideals must live elsewhere," Dumbledore replied. In people, not in stone. No, and them now. Harry thought of McGonagall, rigid and furious, refusing to let the school become a grave. He thought of Hermione lifting a slab to free a child. He thought of Neville running into glowing runes with a sword in his hands. He thought of teachers casting spells with shaking arms, refusing to stop even as walls collapsed. People, not stone. Harry's heartbeat steadied. "Do I have a choice?" he asked. Dumbledore's expression softened. "Yes." Harry looked down at his hands. He saw for a moment. Ash beneath his nails, blood on his knuckles. He thought of Ron and Hermione's faces when he pulled on the cloak. He thought of Ginny's voice. "Come back." "I'm not done," Harry said. And the world snapped. He woke on the forest floor, cold leaves under his cheek. The night was full of distant roaring. Not only battle now, but collapse. Massive. Relentless. He kept his eyes closed, body limp, playing dead, as he had to. He heard Death Eaters murmuring, awed. He heard Voldemort speaking, satisfied. He heard Nagini's scales shifting within her sphere, a soft, terrible sound. Voldemort's voice rose, triumphant. "The boy who lived has come to die. And as he dies, so does his school. So does your hope. So does your rebellion." Harry lay still, heart hammering, listening as Voldemort commanded his followers to march. Back to the ruins, back to claim what remained. When the footsteps retreated and the clearing emptied, Harry opened his eyes. The forest above him was black, branches clawing at the sky. He sat up slowly, every muscle aching. His glasses were gone. The world blurred into smears of torchlight and shadow. But he could still see Hogwarts' silhouette in the distance. Or what was left of it. The castle's shape was broken, sagging. Fires licking through exposed ribs of stone. Where towers had stood, there was open air and smoke. The roar of collapse came in waves, each one stealing a little more of the school from the night. Harry's breath hitched. He forced himself to stand. It wasn't over. Not while Voldemort still breathed. Not while Nagini still lived. Not while anyone inside those ruins needed a reason to keep fighting. Harry turned and ran back toward the dying castle. He moved through the forest like a wound moving through flesh, silent, fast, driven. The closer he got, the louder the destruction became. Stone grinding, beams snapping, the hiss of spells, screams rising and vanishing. The air grew thick with ash until it clung to his skin like sweat. Near the edge of the grounds, Harry saw bodies being carried out. Some alive, some limp. He saw a line of evacuees stumbling toward Hogsmeade, shepherded by teachers and older students, faces blank with shock. The passage was still working, barely, but each tremor threatened to choke it with rubble. He pulled the invisibility cloak over himself again, weaving through the chaos. His scar was oddly quiet now, as if Voldemort believed him dead and had turned away. The absence felt like the moment after a scream, ears ringing. Harry slipped into the ruins of the castle through a broken archway, stepping over fallen stones that had once been part of a wall had leaned against while laughing. The corridor inside was unrecognizable, collapsed sections creating jagged new paths. Enchanted portraits lay face down in rubble, frames cracked. A suit of armor lay twisted, its helm crushed flat. He found Ron and Hermione near what had been the entrance hall, now a cavern of dust and broken columns. Hermione was on her knees beside a wounded student, hands glowing faintly as she tried to close a gash. Ron stood guard, wand raised, face streaked with tears he hadn't wiped away. Harry pulled off the cloak. Hermione looked up first. Her eyes went wide with disbelief, then with rage so fierce it was almost a physical force. She surged to her feet and slapped him hard, before throwing her arms around him as if to crush him back into existence. "You?" she choked. "You?" Ron's face contorted, half laughter, half sob. He grabbed Harry by the shoulders, shaking him. "You stupid, brilliant, absolute." Harry held on to them both, breathing them in like air after drowning. For a heartbeat, the world steadied. Then the castle groaned again, and a section of ceiling collapsed nearby with a crash that sent dust billowing. Hermione flinched, instinctively shielding Harry with her body. Harry pulled back, urgent. "Nagini is protected," he said quickly. "In a sphere. Voldemort thinks I'm dead. He's coming back to the castle. He'll call everyone to him." "Nay." Hermione's face went tight, mind racing through implications. Ron wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, furious determination returning. "So what? What's the plan?" Harry swallowed. "We have to get to the courtyard," he said. "We have to find Neville. We have to tell McGonagall I'm alive. And we have to end this before the castle finishes falling." Hermione's eyes darted upward at the cracked stone, then back at Harry. "We may not have time." "We don't," Harry agreed. They ran again, dodging rubble and desperate fighters. In one corridor they passed a group of teachers holding a line against intruders, spells flashing. In another, they passed students pushing a fallen beam off a trapped classmate. Everywhere, people were fighting not only enemies, but the castle's death. They reached a broken doorway that once led into the courtyard and found Neville there, face smeared with blood, eyes blazing. The sword of Gryffindor was in his hands, and he looked like he'd been forged in fire. He saw Harry and froze for half a heartbeat, disbelief turning into fierce joy. "You're alive," Harry said. "Listen, Voldemort thinks I'm dead. He's coming. Nagini's protected. We need everyone who can stand in the courtyard. We end him there." Neville nodded hard. "We'll do it." A roar echoed across the ruins. Voldemort's voice again, amplified, cruel. "Come and see what remains of your school. Come and kneel." The words rolled through broken halls, like a command carved into stone. Harry felt the castle shudder beneath them, a final long tremor that made dust pour from cracks like sand from an hourglass. Ron's face went pale. "Harry." Harry looked up, listening. Somewhere deep inside Hogwarts, something huge shifted, an entire section of structure giving way. The sound was immense, a sustained thunder that didn't stop. Hogwarts was entering its last moments. Harry turned toward the courtyard, heart hammering. "Now," he said, and they ran to meet the end. The courtyard was no longer a courtyard. It was a bowl of broken stone under a sky choked with ash, ringed by jagged walls that exposed corridors like ribs. Fires burned where windows used to be. A statue's shattered torso lay on its side, its face ground away, its outstretched hand pointing nowhere. People drifted into it in uneven streams, fighters with soot-blackened faces, students gripping wands with both hands, parents who should have been gone but couldn't leave without seeing. Every few seconds the ground shuddered and dust slid from cracks as if the ruins were breathing. Somewhere nearby, water poured from a burst pipe, hissing as it hit hot stone. Voldemort arrived like a silence that made even the flames seem quieter. Death Eaters fanned out behind him, masks gleaming, wands raised. In the torchlight his face looked carved from bone, mouth thin with satisfaction. 2 Death Eaters carried a body between them, limp as a broken doll, the invisibility cloak trailing in the dust. Harry's stomach lurched at the sight of his own face, pale, slack, too still. The crowd's breath caught. Someone sobbed outright. Voldemort raised a pale hand. "Behold," he said softly, and his voice rolled over the ruins with terrible calm. "Your champion, your symbol, dead." He let the word hang, savoring the way it struck. "And as he dies, so does this place. Your proud school is a heap of stone and ash. Kneel, and you may crawl away from it." McGonagall stood at the front of the remaining defenders, wand in hand, chin lifted. She looked older than Harry had ever seen her, as if the castle's age had settled on her shoulders. Her voice came out thin but steady. "We do not kneel." Voldemort's smile widened. "You will." His gaze flicked toward the shimmering sphere beside him. Inside it, Nagini coiled, immense and glistening, eyes bright with cold intelligence. The protective magic around her shimmered like heat haze, responding to Voldemort's attention like a living skin. "Last chance," Voldemort murmured. "Give me your obedience, and I will spare what little remains." A tremor ran through the ground, and a section of wall behind Voldemort cracked with a sound like a breaking spine. Dust rained down. The crowd flinched. Harry lay among the rubble at the edge of the ring, cloak over his body, still as death. Under the cloth, his heart hammered so hard he thought they must hear it. His fingers tightened around his wand until his knuckles ached. He waited for the moment he'd felt in the forest, the small turn of fate, the hinge. Voldemort stepped forward, lifting the Elder Wand. "Then watch," he said, and his voice rose, sharp with relish. "Watch your world end." The sphere around Nagini pulsed, and for the first time Voldemort glanced away from it, attention shifting fully to the crowd. Harry felt it, an intangible slackening, a careless breath. The protective magic did not vanish, but it thinned, as if its keeper had stopped gripping it with both hands. Neville moved. It was not dramatic at first, just a shift in the line, a boy stepping out of the mass like a spark jumping from kindling. He walked into the open with the sword of Gryffindor in his hands, its blade catching torchlight in clean silver flashes. His face was streaked with blood and dust, and his eyes were steady in a way that made Harry's throat tighten. Voldemort's lip curled. "Another child," he said, almost bored. "Does Gryffindor breed only fools?" Neville lifted his chin. "You can burn the castle," he said, voice carrying in the broken bowl. "But you can't burn what it stood for." Something in the crowd shifted, an intake of breath, a gathering of courage like a muscle remembering it exists. Voldemort laughed, cold and sharp. "I've already burned it." His wand flicked toward Neville. A tongue of green light sprang, and Harry sat up. The cloak slid off his shoulders. The night air hit his face like a slap. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Death Eaters staring, defenders gasping, Voldemort's expression snapping from delight to disbelief. "No!" Voldemort screamed, and the sound was not human. It was the sound of a plan shattering. Harry's voice came out rough, but clear. "It's over," he said. "You're done." Voldemort's red eyes fixed on him with raw hatred, the kind that had no room for calculation. "You cannot be alive." "I can," Harry said. "And you can still lose?" Voldemort's attention whipped back toward Nagini, and in that instant the sphere around her flared as if he tried to tighten it. Too late. Neville sprinted, sword raised, moving with the desperate speed of someone who has already accepted his own death. A Death Eater lunged to intercept him. Neville ducked beneath the curse and kept going. The blade flashed once, clean and sure. Nagina's head separated from her body. The protective shimmer collapsed like a soap bubble prick. For a second, the air itself seemed to breathe out. A faint, shrieking hiss, more felt than heard, rippled through the night as something invisible tore free and vanished, like smoke sucked into nothing. Hermione made a sound beside Harry, half sob, half laugh. Ron's grip tightened on Harry's shoulder so hard it hurt. Voldemort stared at the fallen serpent, and for the first time his face held something like fear. Not a large fear. Voldemort did not do large fears, but a sharp, involuntary flicker, like a crack in glass. Harry stepped forward into the open space between them. The rubble under his boots shifted. Behind Voldemort, the castle groaned again, louder, closer, as if listening. "It's just you now," Harry said. "And you're mortal." Voldemort's mouth twisted. "I am afraid," Harry finished, and the word struck like a slap. "You always were. That's why you broke everything you couldn't own." Voldemort's wand snapped up. Avada Kedavra. Green light surged, violent and final. Harry raised his own wand. Expelliarmus! The spells met, and for a heartbeat the air between them was a blinding collision. The Elder Wand wrenched in Voldemort's hand as if it had been yanked by an unseen force. The green light bent, shivered, then snapped back like a whip. Voldemort's eyes widened. His mouth opened, forming a sound that never finished. The killing curse rebounded. It struck him in the chest, and Voldemort fell backward, not exploding into ash, not becoming smoke, simply falling human and heavy, like any other body. His pale hands hit the rubble. His head struck stone with a dull, final thud. For a second, there was no cheer, only stunned silence, as if the world didn't trust itself. Then the ruins of Hogwarts shuddered violently, as if the castle had been holding itself together through sheer spite, and now, with the spell that had been tearing at it gone, it finally allowed itself to give in. A roar rolled through the stone. A wall beyond the courtyard cracked and collapsed inward, sending a cloud of dust and sparks into the air. "Move!" McGonagall screamed, and her voice broke on the word. People surged, grabbing each other, dragging the injured, stumbling toward exits that were no longer corridors but gaps in broken stone. Harry felt Hermione's hand clamp around his wrist. Ron shoved him forward. As they ran, Harry looked back once. Voldemort lay among the rubble, small and still, just a body in a world of broken things. And behind him Hogwarts continued to fall, not as a victory for Voldemort, not as a punishment for the living, but as the last long consequence of war. The castle's stones crashed down in waves, and the sound chased them into the night.